our beautiful world, and yet the way we mess it up by the way we treat each other. This is the fifth presentation looking at the theme of persecution. In the last presentation, we saw some of the reasons for the way we humans abuse each other. It all stems back to one word: insecurity. Christianity is gaining ground worldwide, and those in leadership feel their power base is threatened. Their insistence on getting others to conform to their way of doing things is being threatened. So they set up laws and rules to try and curtail the growth of the followers of Jesus. It doesn't work. And at the same time, the followers of Jesus in many countries are resisting evils: the drug trade, human trafficking, the exploitation of people, the sex trade. And those with power and money in these areas are insecure for fear they would lose their ill-gotten wealth. Insecurity is everywhere, and it's the fundamental source of human problems, and it can generate persecution. That's a very perceptive comment. How those with power love to dominate others. By contrast, Jesus came to establish the kingdom of God. And that's God's domination-free order. Look at the way Jesus treated people. Look at the way he responded to need. Look at the freedom he gave to his followers. He affirmed them, encouraged them, supported them, challenged them, but he never dominated. He never pushed them around. The coming of God's domination-free order. It affects the political world. The kingdom of God stands against the abuse of authority, rule by minorities, stands against injustice or exploitation. It stands against the rich getting richer, while the poor get poorer. And that is happening in most countries in the world today. The kingdom of God stands against economic injustice, where the wealthy West exploits those who are producing the food or the clothes in developing countries. It stands against the use of war or the domination of others to get one's way. It stands against the neglect of the have-nots, who are the majority in so many countries. The kingdom of God stands against the abuse of women and rape, the abuse of children, physical and sexual violence, domestic violence. It stands against patriarchy or inequalities in society. All of us are equal in value before God. And it stands against our natural human greed. It stands against illness. Jesus came and released people from illness and from disease, and he still does today. It stands against selfishness and our desire to gain more possessions, and the way we exploit each other to achieve that. That's the picture of the kingdom of God, but sadly, again, Walter Wink makes this very astute observation. I think we as the people of God should hang our heads in shame that we have not lived up to the standards of the kingdom of God, and the systems we call churches far too often have fallen back in domination. And at the individual level, we have failed to fulfill the pattern of living that's kingdom living. Let's look again at Matthew chapters 5, 6 and 7, the beautiful picture that Jesus painted of life in the kingdom that he came to bring. Impossible for us to achieve humanly, but possible to achieve when we trust in the resources that he provides for us. But so often we fail to do it, and we become the laughingstock of societies in many countries of the world. Domination could be seen that way. At the family level, community level, national level, international level, or religious level. And democracy doesn't automatically solve the problems. Because very often people get into power and impose their views on minorities who didn't get into power. That is not equivalent to the kingdom of God, because that's a domination-free order. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Put it another way, we put the benefit of the other person above any agenda we might have for ourselves. Our agenda, if you like, is the benefit of other people. We submit ourselves to their benefit. We're seeking the best for them. Now that's true domination-free living. And when the kingdom of God really comes in, it's a counterculture. It's domination-free. And it will confront domination-orientated cultures, no matter how they're expressed, where they are, and how they operate, and they're throughout the world. It's inevitable there will be this confrontation. Because the kingdom of God stands against the natural way that we human beings seek to live. That's the major sources of the domination-orientated ways of the world. Secular totalitarian states, the rule going down from one to the other. The elected dictatorships that characterize so many of our Western countries, particularly the United Kingdom. The ruling class syndrome, which is all over the place. In Islamic states, the ruling class is the religious ruling class. And then there are people who have power, who just abuse other people, almost for the fun of it. The wild dictators and extremists. And then we have insecure religious leaders who will try to attack anybody or anything that they see as a perceived threat to bolster up their position. The kingdom of God is a domination-free order and stands against all of these. And inevitably, there will be persecution. You see, that side comes from security. Security could be the one word that's just written over the life of Jesus. He was utterly secure in his relationship with his Father, the God who made the universe. Utterly secure in what he was there to do. By contrast, and you can often see it after the event when people do historical studies, we can see the utter insecurity in all of these situations. And those who are insecure will use the power they've got to put down others in an attempt to put themselves up and bolster their security. And it never works. Let's look at Western culture in a bit more detail now. A quick overview of the kind of patterns of the way our societies, and this is a very general statement, not everything will be true in every detail in every Western country. But there's a general view in the goodness of humanity, and a failure to recognize that while human beings are capable of the most wonderful creative achievements, we're also capable of the most horrendous evils. And we've seen many of them in the 20th century. But if you believe in the essential goodness of humanity, which is a flawed belief, then you want humans to be free to develop fully. And there are no absolutes in right and wrong. What each of us decides is right and wrong, or the majority in our societies decide is right and wrong. Often the majorities who manage to get power in these societies. All opinions are equal. And any evil in the society is just a social problem and must be dealt with by social agencies. It doesn't face up to the fact that within humanity, within all of us, there is a potential of the most terrible evil, along with the potential for the most wonderful creative good. Western societies elevate tolerance, but the ruling class defines what's meant by intolerance. Individualism is seen as very important. Each of us has the right to do our own things and to make ourselves happy. And religion is perceived as irrational. And we've got to face up to the fact that if you look at most religions and most religious practices, there is an enormous amount that is utterly irrational. And that includes the ways of the church. So the Western view is that religion must be privatized. Because it's irrational, it's okay and it's harmless if people do it in private on their own or in their own groups. But don't let it affect life. Don't let it affect policy. Don't let it affect lawmaking. Because the ruling class defines intolerance. That's an overview of some of the features of Western culture today. There's good and bad in it. The development of equality, less class division, a greater social justice, and in many ways there's a better treatment of sexual and ethnic minorities. Good things have come out of Western culture, but there is a problem, because the loss of clarity of right and wrong generates that. And this emphasis on individual freedom, it tends to play down obligations to each other, caring for each other, and making the time and the effort to help those who are going through a tough time. Sometimes their own fault, sometimes not. And in our Western cultures today, there's a lot of substance abuse, particularly alcohol. Sexual excesses are almost the norm, and are accepted as normal in our media presentations. But even worse, with all our lotteries, we've got a something for nothing culture, where if you can get something without earning it, that's fine. But that all has led to abuse of power. You can see it in the way that's gone on in the financial sector, but it's wider than that. There's an abuse of power in media, where to get the story that will sell the paper overrules and trumps any question of morality or concern for the people who are being picked on. And in politics and economics, there's the danger, and you can see it today, of power being abused. And what is true is, in much of the West, the rich and poor divide's getting bigger. Now that's not unique to the West, it's happening in the developing world, and it's happening in the Islamic world. That's not the way of Jesus. And moral standards are getting fudged. Right wrong is blurred. And part of that is a devaluing of marriage. Any relationship between any two people willingly entered into it, it's called marriage. And that puts question marks over the family stability of the traditional family structure. And everything's black and white. And that the media loves generating false dichotomies. Science religion is one of them, where there should be no dichotomy at all. And indeed many, many writers and presenters have shown that the two things are in harmony. But it's a kind of secularism agenda. And religious insights are just pushed to the fringes, because religion is regarded as based on ignorance and superstition. Now let's be honest. If you look at many of our practices and ask the basis of them, some of them are pretty close to superstition. And in our attempt to get round the terrible evil of racism, we're now beginning to see a kind of inverted racism. In our attempt not to make Christianity seem so central, we've got a kind of inversion where Christianity should be attacked at every turn and other religions are not attacked. And some minorities get treated with ridicule, but others don't. Puzzling at times. Some interesting quotations. The famous psychologist. Rationalism is the disease of our times. We think that we're clever enough that we can solve all our problems. No, we're not. We need the help of the creator of the universe. Another psychologist. Astute observation. Many things that were in our society, and some are still there, are a distillation of time-tested techniques that let us work round the shortcomings of human nature. We're in danger of throwing these out, the baby with the bathwater. And in his recent book, The Liberal Delusion, Marsh makes that statement: the danger is that society moves to be non-judgmental. That's fine, but value-free and amoral. We've cut ourselves loose from the moorings of the past. And an economist noted that our liberal democracies of the West, and he describes them as totalitarianism with a human face, just like dictators, but softened a bit. A lot of truth in that, and you can look all over Europe and see that pattern occurring. And perhaps the most famous physicist of all times, a person who is religiously enlightened, appears to me to be one who has, to the best of his ability, liberated himself from the fetters of his selfish desires. An interesting comment. Our Western society and culture and persecution. There are dangers for our Western civilization, and many people have pointed these out. Very severe dangers. Our moral roots, we're in danger of losing them. You see, we've kind of weakened the absolute certainties of right and wrong. Anything goes now, because everyone's opinion is equal. And we champion equality. But we forget that. And we'll look in a moment at equality a little further. We advance freedom, but the freedom for one group often denies freedom for others. That has always been true. But we've got to be careful in this word freedom. It can be very much an illusion. And almost anything is permitted, and the consequences don't really matter. And in our media presentations, couples slipping into bed at every turn. But never seem to be any consequences in terms of relationships, security, love, and the possible birth of children. It's all just an instant feel-good factor. What we like, what makes us feel good today. Tomorrow doesn't matter. And those who stand in the way of this are often vilified. And our politicians have now started to do this on a big scale. Disagreement is simply not tolerated. And that leads to a new political correctness. And it is intolerant. This is what it will be. If you don't come along with it, you get vilified and abused and called all sorts of names. Independent thought is not wanted or admired at all. You see, the dogmatism has come in there, and one set of dogmatisms has been replaced by another. And it's interesting. I've noted this again and again. I take the two extremes. Anything criticism of Christians, that's fair game. You can abuse them as much as you like, mock them as much as you like, make television programs as much as you like. But it doesn't happen for Muslims, because those people know they'll be called Islamophobes at best, and they might have their lives threatened at worst, as some of the media in Denmark and France discovered to their cost. But religion in general is being mocked and regarded as irrational. Now, I need to say here that religion that is irrational, and let's face it, much is, there's no place for that. We need to be able to justify what we believe and what we practice in terms of evidence, and most religions lack it. But that's a feature of our Western civilization, and the danger is we throw at every religious dimension. Say we look at equality again. Just 4 quick points. It does not mean that we're all born with equal abilities. Sometimes it's presented as if that's true. It cannot be true. We are so diverse. One person good at sport, another one good at music, another one good at neither. But sometimes the person who's not good in the academic world or the sporting world has got wonderful abilities of listening and caring. I just give examples. But we are all entitled to be treated equally. But equality of opportunity doesn't generate an equality of how we're all going to turn out. We're not all clones of each other. It does not imply that all will achieve equally or all will be able to do everything. God has made us with a rich diversity. Let's watch we don't dumb down culture with equality by calling all cultures equal. It isn't true. In some cultures, female genital mutilation is practiced. It is simply wrong to abuse the body of another human being in this way, and they don't want it. You can't justify that as saying that that cultural element is equal. It's wrong. And now we're in the position where we've taken equality and diversity legislation so far that it's denying freedom for thought, even for those who hold minority views. And sometimes the people of God, the followers of Jesus, hold different views. And they're being abused. And you can get the farce of a judge being condemned because he simply believes that the traditional man-woman family is better for bringing up children. That's not politically acceptable. It's not the politically correct view of today. It happens to be true, though, because the evidence shows it. But he's condemned and sent off for retraining. We're living in a strange, topsy-turvy world where evidence is thrown out the window. Now, we've got to admit that the people of God of the past, we've done some terrible things. So in a sense, society is getting its retaliation. But it doesn't justify people in the workplace being fired because they happen to wear a bracelet or something around their neck with a cross in it. But someone else wearing a hijab or a Hindu symbolism, they're not fired. Where you get a Christian who happens to talk about their faith in the workplace, a Muslim complains, the Christian loses. But if a Muslim talks about his or her faith in the workplace, they're not fired. And why do our media never address the issue of sexuality in the Islamic world? Where Muslim views on, for example, homosexuality are very clear and very strong and are not politically correct today. And why does our media allow the Islamic world often to present the fact that every religion's got its extremists, when in fact only Islamic extremists give you suicide bombers. And the whole question of gay marriage. Why can people who don't believe in that not be respected for not believing in it? Why do they have to be vilified? And yet at the same time, those of other religions who don't believe in gay marriage either, never a comment is passed. Sometimes our media present as if all religions generate atrocities. In today's world, 80% of all persecution is directed against Christians by others. And Christians do not initiate atrocities. When a Sikh playwright put on a play in a theatre, a secular theatre, that the Sikh community resented, they had a riot outside. As a result, the play was withdrawn because the theatre management were scared that their employees would be seriously hurt. Violence wins. Sharia courts were now allowing these de facto in various parts of the country. Do we really know what's involved there? Do we really understand the disadvantage women are placed in Sharia law courts? A woman who seeks a divorce will have the most terrible job getting it, because in a Sharia law court the woman's voice counts for half the weight of the man's voice. So the husband always wins. Are we aware of that? There is no equality in these courts at all. Recently there was an incident with a bakery company in Ireland. The Equal Equalities organisation took them to court and won the case. Now let me just give you a little scenario. Suppose that bakery company had been run by an organisation that was basically gay or lesbian. And a Christian couple had asked them to bake a cake where written across the top was, "We believe in marriage between one man and one woman." Would the Equal Opportunities Commission have taken the bakery company to court if they'd declined to meet the order? Or make it even worse, supposing the bakery company was run by Muslims. They would never have made a cake with that statement that was required of them. Would they have been taken to court? You see, there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. It's an interesting comment about who gives where. If you look at Christian organizations, churches, Christian groups, and look at the giving that they give overseas or into this country, who set up the food banks when there were difficulties with people in the country? It was Christian organizations. And so many good things are being run throughout the UK, throughout Western Europe, and indeed throughout the world by groups of Christians seeing a need, and often at great expense of time and energy and money to themselves, trying to do something about meeting the need, to help other people, irrespective of who the other people are, irrespective of their religion. Where does that ever come in our media presentations? It is simply enormous. There are many churches and Christian groups doing remarkable things and bringing huge benefit to society. And on the ground, very often social agencies, hospitals and police forces are aware of it and appreciate it. But where in our society, particularly in our media political society, does that ever hit the headlines? Here's some programs that some people have suggested will never appear in our terrestrial media programs. See, the way of Jesus influenced that. Interesting historical comment. You'll never see that. So often presented that religions cause war. It's not true. While they can do, the worst atrocities in the world have always been caused by those who are not religious. There's some examples. But what about the growth of the followers Jesus in China today? It is exponential. When does that hit the media? It would offend the Chinese government. That's why it doesn't. And you'd have uproar from the Islamic states if the persecution in these states was made public in the West. Down through the centuries, many of the great social advantages were spearheaded by Christian leaders. Interesting comment. And I mentioned today how Christians are so involved in meeting many of the modern needs of our society in this country and indeed throughout the world. Given unreservedly to all, irrespective of their religion. That would never hit our media. But we've got to face up to the fact that we went badly wrong in the past and we're still going wrong. One of the tragedies of Christianity is that church and state were linked. Jesus made it quite clear that was not to be so, and we have disobeyed him in doing it. And as a result, we've imposed Christian legislation on people who didn't share our views. We're getting it back in our teeth today. And too often we've used pressure to force people into belief, sometimes violent pressure. We were wrong. And too often we made the way of Jesus a male-dominated world where the men ran everything. And we're still going wrong. And we've got to be honest. It's a strange thing in part of the United Kingdom, England, there is a state church. We're still going wrong of linking church and state. It is completely irrational that in the House of Lords bishops have their place as of right. I'm a great admirer of the bishops. Many of them do wonderful things. But no other religious group has that of right. Not even other Christian groups have that of right. And much that's going on in our Christian practices and churches today, people just shake their heads and say, what's that all about? Just ponder what goes on in your group and look at it through the eyes of a total outsider and ask, what's the evidence? Many of our practices are based on nothing. There is no evidential base at all. And in recent years, there's been some terrible unethical practices exposed in our churches, where people have been abused in the most vicious and wicked ways. We're still going wrong. And I suggest we've got things to put right. Before we start complaining about persecution, we've got things to put right. Basically, we've got to put our house in order. And that means getting back to getting kingdom values central. And again I say, let's look again at Matthew 5, 6 and 7, where Matthew has collated the teaching of Jesus on the values of the kingdom. They're totally counter-cultural. If we lived by these, society would be transformed. They're impossible to live up to. Jesus knows that. But we can decide we want to live by them and then ask his help, and he will always give us the help when we take the decision. You decide, he enables. And let's get back to evidence. The way of Jesus is so thoroughly founded on clear evidence, evidence from every sort, shape or description. Let's get back to the evidence and strip out the things that have been added on over the centuries that are irrelevant. These are some of the things we need to put right today. I could summarize it that way. In the West today, we're going to face increasing persecution because the kingdom of God is counter-cultural, and our cultures are moving away from the way of Jesus. It's inevitable, but we've got things to put right. Let's get down on our knees and admit our past errors. We got it badly wrong. And let's be prepared to say it publicly and apologize for the way that we've treated people in the past. And let's get it back to evidence-based thinking. There is no room for irrationality, the kind of statement where people say, but my faith will not let me, and they come up with something that's completely off the wall. The way of Jesus is rational. Sometimes it blows our minds. It's supra-rational. It's above our minds. But it is never, never irrational. Jesus was never, ever irrational. And there's a wonderful spate of Christian books coming on the market today, written by godly men and women, who are bringing us back to these central things that are based on evidence. All kinds of evidence. Let's rethink this. And to put our house in order. Our church life is so far away from the way of Jesus. We're running systems, religious systems. Jesus never came to set up a religious system. He came to bring in the kingdom of God. And let's put our house in order, whatever our church background is. And let's get kingdom values central. And that means love is at the center. It means that for you and me, our agenda is the benefit of other people, especially those other people who do not belong, who disagree with us, who treat us badly, who misunderstand us, who misrepresent us, who put us down. Impossible? Yes. But we can decide we're going to do it and go to Jesus and say, Lord, help me. Now that's one prayer that he will always come and respond to instantly. Love at the center. Let's put our house in order. And let's recognize that the way of Jesus, the way of kingdom values, is countercultural. And as our culture moves away from it, there will be persecution. But we need to put our house in order first before we complain about the persecution.